Krista and I had been inseparable friends for years, bonded by our shared love for the exhilarating rush of snowboarding. So, when she extended an invitation to her family's cozy cabin in the secluded Idaho mountains, promising a weekend of fresh powder and adventure, I eagerly accepted. The drive up was long and treacherous, winding along narrow back roads that cut through thick forests and past isolated cabins tucked away among the trees. Krista explained that most of these cabins were only used as vacation homes due to the heavy snowfall that made it nearly impossible to live there year-round. As we finally arrived at her family's cabin, my breath caught in my chest at the sight before me, a picturesque log home nestled among towering pine trees, coated in a thick layer of untouched snow with only animal tracks visible. After unpacking and settling in, we spent the evening cooking dinner together, cuddled up on the couch watching a movie on Netflix, and eventually calling it a night as darkness descended quickly in the winter months. The next morning, we eagerly donned our snow gear and hit the slopes, carving through pristine snow and leaving behind fresh tracks until our legs could no longer keep up with our adrenaline-fueled excitement. During a break outside the lodge, enjoying hot cocoa and admiring the breathtaking view, I couldn't help but notice unfamiliar boot prints in the snow that didn't belong to any skiers. Brushing it off as possibly from a hiker or snowshoer, Krista shrugged it off casually. But a sense of unease settled over me. Snapping a photo to show her dad later on, I pushed away the feeling and focused on enjoying the rest of our day. Exhausted from hours of non-stop snowboarding, we returned to the cabin just as dusk began to fall behind the looming mountains. While Krista started a fire in the cozy living room, I ventured outside to gather more firewood and immediately noticed even more strange tracks circling around the cabin. My heart rate quickened as I realized something was not right. I called Krista over to take a look at the strange prints in the snow. She froze, her eyes glued to the ground. "Those are too big to be from a person," she said, her voice uneasy. I finished examining the footprints while Krista retreated back inside. When I emerged a few minutes later, the cabin was completely dark. My phone had no signal and my heart was pounding. Shining my flashlight at the door where the tracks led, I noticed they abruptly disappeared. Following them around the side of the house, I realized with horror that they ended at the back door. Someone or something had been trying to get into our cabin. Panicking, I pounded on the door and yelled for Krista. Finally, she opened it and yanked me inside before slamming it shut. She was shaking and told me that when I was outside, someone had tried to open the front door. Thankfully, she had locked it just in time and hit the lights through a window as she watched a tall figure peer inside before slowly walking away from view. Terrified, she had hidden in the cellar while the intruder lurked outside. In a state of panic, I quickly loaded a rifle from her dad's collection. We sat in darkness, listening to the soft patter of snow outside, joined by the unmistakable crunch of approaching footsteps. Without hesitation, I flung open the door and fired shots into the night while screaming at the top of my lungs. The footsteps receded into the woods as we barricaded ourselves inside and kept the gun close at hand. At dawn, we packed up and hurried down the mountain to report everything to police officers at their station. They took our statement and promised to send a car up to investigate the prints, but I knew deep down they wouldn't find anything. Whatever or whoever was out there had long disappeared into that dense and frozen forest. It goes without saying that Krista and I have no plans to return to that cabin by ourselves anytime in the near future. The terrifying incident that would forever be ingrained in my memory occurred when I was just 23 years old. However, it was 2 years prior, at the young age of 21, that my world was already turned upside down by the passing of my dear mother. My dad, who had lost his eyesight several years before, remained fiercely independent and capable despite his disability. With determination and a sharp mind, he had sold his successful energy company and ensured our family's financial security for life. Now my sister Katie and I resided in our childhood home, while Dad lived in a nearby one-story condo, conveniently located near the village shops and essential grocery stores. Between us, we managed tasks like overseeing the rental properties we inherited and driving Dad to appointments or places he couldn't easily reach on his own. Yet, most days, he thrived on his own, navigating through life with grace and adaptability. It was an evening during a blustering winter storm that it all changed. Katie was stranded at her boyfriend's house, half an hour away. Left alone in the house, I decided to call Dad and check on him due to the harsh weather conditions outside. After 4 rings, his phone went to voicemail, something highly unusual since he always answered our calls promptly. Growing increasingly worried, I waited a few more minutes before calling again with the same result. Fearing the worst, I left him a message pleading for him to call me back as soon as possible. Unable to shake off my unease, I dialed Katie's number next to confirm if Dad had mentioned any plans of going out in this treacherous weather. To my relief, she replied in the negative, but deep down inside, a knot of nerves formed in my stomach as I realized something wasn't right with my dad's absence and unresponsiveness. I knew I had to hurry over to his place to make sure he was okay. The roads were treacherous, covered in slick snow, and barely any cars seemed brave enough to venture out in these hazardous conditions. My phone kept buzzing with winter storm warnings, reminding me that it was not safe to be outside. If Dad had tried to walk anywhere in this weather, I was extremely worried for him. Carefully and slowly, I made my way to his condo. When I arrived, I saw 2 sets of footprints leading up to his front door through the snow. One set looked like it belonged to Dad's boots, while the other appeared to be from generic sneakers. This could mean that either Dad had gone out earlier and just returned, or someone had recently paid him a visit. I decided to see if the front door was unlocked, knowing Dad's stubborn habit of leaving it that way despite our lectures on safety. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, the knob turned easily when I tried it. As I stepped into the living room, I scanned the area and noticed something that sent shivers down my spine: melted snow tracks on the wood floor. They clearly came from the same boots that had walked outside, and they led from the front door down the hallway towards Dad's bedroom. "Dad," I called out, but there was no response. Did he just come back home shortly before I arrived? If so, there was no logical reason why he wouldn't have heard me calling for him. I continued following the melted tracks, shouting louder for Dad as I went along. They led into his bedroom, and then further still, right into his bathroom. As I approached my dad's condo, a chill ran down my spine. The usually peaceful and open door was closed, and the shower curtain was pulled shut. A feeling of unease settled in the pit of my stomach as I let myself in. The air inside was thick and heavy with a strange energy, and I noticed that the bathroom light was on. My dad never closes doors or turns off lights. It was clear that someone had been in our home who shouldn't have been there. I wasted no time in calling 911, making sure to shut the front door tightly behind me. Despite the raging storm outside, the police arrived promptly. We entered the condo together, guns drawn and hearts pounding. As we made our way through each room, tension grew thicker with each passing second. But it wasn't until we reached my dad's bedroom that we found the intruder, a man sitting calmly on his bed with his hands raised in surrender. My dad arrived about 10 minutes later, looking unharmed but shaken. He joined us as we took statements and gathered evidence. We later learned that the intruder was a neighbor living just a few units away, who had been watching my dad's place and waiting for an opportunity to break in. We urged my dad to hire a lawyer and pursue harsh penalties against this dangerous trespasser. In the end, justice was served as he was charged and convicted of third-degree burglary, locked up behind bars where he belongs. However, despite his imprisonment, the emotional damage he caused still lingers. My family will never again take my dad's safety and independence lightly. We remain vigilant and grateful for the swift response of law enforcement in protecting our loved ones from harm. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, snow was always my favorite thing. The way it blanketed the streets and transformed everything into a winter wonderland filled me with joy and excitement. But that all changed one fateful winter night in 2019. A heavy snowstorm descended upon our town, and my family had planned to visit relatives on the coast for the weekend. However, I convinced them to let me stay behind by pretending to be sick. At 17 years old, they thought I was responsible enough to take care of the house while they were away. The first day alone was great. I indulged in a marathon of Netflix shows, played video games, and even had an epic snowball fight with my energetic dog, Spot, in our backyard. As the sun began to set, I felt a twinge of hunger and decided to venture down to the local fish and chips shop for some hot food. The route to town involved taking a shortcut through a long, dark path lined with trees that US locals dub it as the East-Tuck-and-the-Wainukistad. Wajul wind shortcut. With the thick snow clouds blocking out any moonlight, it was eerily dark as I crunched my way down that narrow path. As I walked, my footsteps echoed loudly against the silence around me. The only source of light came from a lone street lamp halfway down the path, but it had never been replaced since burning out months ago. As I approached it, a sense of unease settled over me. But before I could turn back and take the longer route through town, 2 loud snaps rang out from the woods on my right. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself that it was just a deer or other wildlife making noise. But then the snapping turned into loud, crunching sounds that seemed to follow me as I broke into a panicked run. Finally emerging from the dark path onto my quiet street, I sprinted towards my house with takeout in hand. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to unlock the door, my mind reeling with fear and uncertainty and adrenaline. With trembling hands, I locked the door securely behind me. Peering through the window into the empty, silent street, I finally felt safe, though still shaken by what I had heard earlier. After quickly eating my meal, I tried to distract myself with video games, while Spot dozed contentedly near the fireplace. But soon enough, she was barking wildly and scratching at the back door. Annoyed, I got up to investigate and turned on the outside light, only to see nothing but my own footsteps and those of Spot, from earlier in the pristine blanket of snow in the yard. It dawned on me that Spot must have somehow gotten back inside. My heart dropped into my stomach as it hit me. I had come home through the front door instead of the back. A blast of icy air hit the back of my neck as I realized that I had left the back door wide open. Suddenly, I heard a loud thump upstairs and grabbed Spot before running out to pound on my neighbor's front door until they woke up. The police searched the house and grounds thoroughly but found no intruder inside, just a set of footprints leading from the back garden over the fence and off into the woods. Too terrified to go back to that house alone, I stayed with my neighbors for weeks, knowing whoever it was had been inside and likely watched me, knew my routine. To this day, when I'm out in the snow at night, I constantly look over my shoulder and still hear those ominous footsteps crunching steadily towards me out of the darkness. The memories of that merciless week-long blizzard still haunt me, etched into my mind like a scar. As residents of the remote and isolated trailer park on the edge of Pine's Edge, we were no strangers to brutal winters. But this storm was unlike anything we had ever faced before. It arrived without warning, an army of snow and ice propelled by fierce winds. Within hours, visibility plummeted to dangerous levels, and temperatures dropped to bone-chilling lows. Our small trailers shook under the relentless onslaught as we huddled inside, wrapped in layers of clothing and praying for it to end. By the 5th day, conditions had deteriorated even further. Food and water supplies were dwindling rapidly, and our isolated community was rationing what little remained. With power and communication lines severed, we were completely cut off from the outside world and growing increasingly desperate. As morale sank along with the mercury, a small group of us braved waist-deep snowdrifts to consult with Tony, owner of the largest trailer in the park. Huddled together, we discussed our limited options as the storm raged on outside. Suddenly, all sources of artificial light flickered out one by one, plunging us into complete darkness. We could only rely on the dim glow of our mobile phone screens to push back the suffocating blackness. That's when we heard it, an insistent tapping at the window, followed by a voice carried on the wind. "Is anyone out there?" But it wasn't Margaret, our neighbor. Despite its eerily accurate mimicry, there was something sinister lurking outside in the darkness, and it wanted in. With frantic urgency, we scrambled to fortify the door against its violent intrusions, huddling in terror as we listened to its relentless efforts interspersed with unearthly sounds. The attack came to a sudden stop, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. We could hear the muffled screams of our neighbors as their barricades failed at daybreak. When we finally emerged, we found that the storm had passed, but it had left behind its mark. Our once lively community now lay still and covered in a thick blanket of snow. As we looked around, we saw our friends and neighbors standing motionless, with twisted grins on their faces. They simply watched us as we abandoned our homes, knowing that whatever evil had changed them would also pursue us. The local news never reported the truth of what happened there, but another storm is coming, and I urge you to batten down the hatches and not answer the calls of strangers. Lock your doors to those who mimic familiar voices, but come with sinister intentions. Stock up on supplies and pray that your town will be spared from the same fate as Pine's Edge.